Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Clark, research analyst for Money and Markets, and joining me as he does each and every week is Green Zone Fortune's co-editor Charles Sizemore. Charles from Peru, welcome. Thank you for joining again this week. And I've got an interesting one for you. Last week, you and I were talking about this offline a little bit, but last week it was announced that Jack Dorsey, who started Twitter and has been its CEO for the last, I believe, 15 years, has stepped down immediately. The chief, I want to say the chief technical officer or something like that was immediately named a replacement for Dorsey. Dorsey remains the CEO of Square, which is a very popular fintech company. But this brought about an interesting question in terms of, we have these two social media giants in Twitter and Meta. Meta, of course, formerly Facebook, still trades under FB, but is now known as Meta.
By the way, how many years did it take you to start calling Google Alphabet instead of Google? It's going to take me so long to start to remember to call Facebook Meta. It's
still Google unless I'm referring to it as the proper company. Otherwise, it's still Google. I mean, it's not going to, Facebook is still Facebook. Meta, if I'm referring to it as a company, and that's going to take a little time to get used to, but
you pretty much have to rewire your brain to make that distinction.
You do, especially when they still maintain the tickers like Google's GOG or GEOGL for either Class A or Class C, and then you have FB for Meta. So, but regardless, you have two companies here that have faced a pretty significant amount of headwind over the last several months. Meta, of course, coming under fire with a whistleblower investigation with the Wall Street Journal, corporate culture issues, questions over its algorithm, its business practices, just some very shady things that have been uncovered by the Wall Street Journal. Twitter, on the other hand, hasn't really faced those really negative headlines, but when you have a CEO who started your company for 15 years, suddenly all of a sudden step down like that, it's going to generate a lot of interest, and that is exactly what happened. Is Twitter stock has had dropped exponentially since Dorsey made the announcement that @Jack was no longer going to be a thing anymore on Twitter. So it kind of brought about an interesting question of comparing these two stocks, both of which, I mean, they're both social media stocks. They're both technically, in terms of their sector, they are in web-based data and services, which is kind of ironic considering how they're in the market of selling data, collecting it and selling it. But you and I kind of have our own, a very similar outlook when it comes to social media. I don't think either one of us use it all that much. Not necessarily a big fan. Twitter is mine of choice. Not really a big Facebook guy. If
I don't even have an account on Facebook. I deleted it, which was a process to delete it, by the way. It took me years to actually successfully delete it. But
I don't think anyone cares what I'm having for dinner. Really, I just don't think anyone cares. So
no, they would. You'd get like 27 likes for posting a picture of an apple or something. I mean, like that's, I don't understand it, but.
And I'm good with people not knowing that, really. But interestingly enough, if you look at, the numbers here right now, in 2020, the number of social network users in the US was right around 223 million people, which is a good percentage of the population. However, if you scale that up into 2021 and beyond to 2026, 323.1 million people will be using social media by 2026. That's
essentially everybody over the age of 4, I think. I mean,
exactly. Yeah. I mean, the penetration of social networking in the US is going to go from 67% in 2020 to 94.5% in 2026. Basically, social networking is going to be it's going to replace regular networking. It's going to be replacing face-to-face conversation as much as it already has. So you have these big powerhouses like Twitter and Meta that have been in the game for a while, but have faced some significant headwinds. My question to you is let's look at these two stocks. And as an investor, if I'm really interested in kind of capitalizing on this trend of 94.5% penetration of social networking by 2026, which horse do I want to back here?
Let's back up for a minute. Let's go back to Jack Dorsey. So I think it's interesting. Jack Dorsey is, sort of the brains behind two of the bigger names in technology of the last decade and a half, 2 decades, Twitter and Square. He chose one. He chose to disengage from one and put his focus on the other. It's telling which one he chose. He did not choose to continue running Twitter. He chose to continue running Square. Why? Well, I don't know. I can't call him up and ask. We're not that tight, but to me, it looks like Dorsey looks at his two creations here, and he says, which one's likely to be the winner over time? Which one's likely to make more money? Which one's likely to be worth my time? This guy's a billionaire. He doesn't really have to do anything. He could just sit on a beach all day if he wanted to, but he's decided that Square is worth his time. I would tend to agree. Square, I don't use Square. I use some of its competitors. I use PayPal. I use Venmo. I use various fintechs. But Square is very, very popular, and fintech is slowly replacing the banking system, or at least learning to coexist with the banking system. So to me, fintech is the much bigger story. That's probably where if I were Dorsey, I would have made the same decision. You can't really be CEO of two big companies and give both, attention. If you have to choose, I would have chose Square as well. Now, going back to, what does that mean for, Twitter versus Meta, Meta parentheses, Facebook. So there's not unlimited ad revenue out there. And the way things are shaping up now, the ad space is really dominated by Facebook and by Google. Those are the platforms that are really gobbling up most of that revenue. Facebook has been remarkably good about monetizing their users. There was a movie back in, I think, the 90s, early 2000s, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, where Brad Pitt stumbles into a bar faking an awful Irish accent, and this Irish mafia don says, "What, is he here for a job?" He says, "You are the job," and shoots him. That's kind of how Facebook is. Facebook isn't the product. You're the product. I'm the product. Well, I guess we're not the product because we're not users, but people that use Facebook are the product. That's what they sell. They sell the data of the users, and they're good at it. They're remarkably good at it. Twitter has been far less successful in monetizing its users. It just doesn't have the same level of penetration. They just haven't figured it out. They have troves and troves and troves of data. They just haven't figured out how to properly monetize it to the extent that Facebook has. So if I'm looking at this, if Dorsey doesn't feel like Twitter is worth sticking around for, why should you or I? If I'm going to put money in either one of these, and by the way, I would consider putting money into social media stocks, not too far from putting money behind a drug lord. It's like you're putting money into something that's evil. But if you're going to do it, if you're going to be a cocaine baron, fine, be a cocaine baron. If you're going to be a social media investor, be a social media investor. At least back the right horse, back the one that's going to make you the most money. I would say, Facebook, Meta, Facebook, whatever they're calling it. That's the one that I would choose. They run a better business at the end of the day.
I think when you talk about Jack Dorsey, another contributing factor to his decision to move more to Square than to Twitter is Jack Dorsey is very big with cryptocurrency. He's a very big proponent of crypto. I think I read an interview he did after he announced that he was leaving, that if he wasn't running either company, he would be working in Bitcoin. So I think you're going to see Square take a much more proactive. I mean, they've already been proactive with cryptocurrency, but I think you're going to see them even evolve further into the crypto market with Square and the payment processing and things like that. I think you're going to see them maybe even elevate themselves to the forefront of fintech related.
This is the future of finance. Yeah, this is what I was saying earlier. Fintech is, I don't know that you can ever completely replace the banking system, but you're going to right size it. You're going to push the banking system into kind of a box, and this is where it goes. And then fintech is going to replace a lot of what banks used to do. I mean, already, imagine you and I go to a bar, order a few drinks, you pick up the tab, I pick up the tab. How are we going to settle this up? You're probably going to Venmo me, right? I'm going to Venmo you. That's what you do. I mean, you don't write a check. I mean, who does that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So this is a silly example, but that is an example of fintech crowding into an area that traditional banks might have done before. Like it's just, you're going to see more of that with every passing year.
Right. So, yeah, I think Dorsey probably made the right decision. In terms of stock over the last 12 months, Twitter is actually down about 0.5%. This recent announcement kind of pushed them down below into negative territory. Facebook, interestingly enough, is only up 22%. from where it was a year ago. So, obviously Facebook has made the wider gain, the stronger gains in terms of overall performance. Quite honestly, I'm not a fan of either of these stocks. But if it's as Charles would say, gun to your head and you got to pick one, then Meta is obviously the way to go. That said, I think there's room for both. But again, like we talked about last week with streaming and Netflix, social media networks have become very, very crowded. There's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of different mediums out there of which to communicate whatever message you're trying to communicate. TikTok, Twitter, Meta, Facebook, WhatsApp, there's a lot of Instagram,
and it's become a zero-sum game. It's become a zero-sum game because as social media, just the number of people on social media has become pretty saturated. You're not, the time you're spending on Snapchat is time that you're not spending on Facebook, or time you're spending on Instagram is time you're not spending on Twitter. Like you can't be on all the platforms simultaneously. There'll be no reason to be. So it has become a bit of a zero-sum game.
Right. So, my inclination is probably not to look at either one of these two stocks, but again, gun to your head, got to invest in one or the other. My inclination would be to go with Facebook right now. It's not saying that Twitter is a bad company and will not come back out. I mean, they were up 65% at one point during the year during the big stock run up in late February, early March. And I don't see any reason why they won't go back to that. However, whether they're sustainable at that level is another question. And I think it's going to take some time to realize to really figure out where is Twitter going? Where is this new leadership going to take Twitter in terms of into the new year, into the next 5 years, and the next 10 years? Because social media is something that constantly has to evolve. You can't just, ask MySpace. You can't just have the same platform and expect it to be successful without making any augmentations or improvements to it. So there's always got to be something new, and be interesting to see what Twitter does. So I think both of us are in agreement. Gun to your head, Facebook, Meta is the way to go. If you're looking at either one of these two. For Jack Dorsey, I wish him the best of luck, and really
I also wish him a barber. He needs to really investigate a barber. I mean,
he's not quite
a
as
billionaire. He's one of the wealthiest men in the world, and he looks like a homeless person. I think he can afford a good barber. Maybe
after running two companies, when you cut that in half, maybe you have time to go and get your hair cut and get a mani-pedi or whatever it is that Jack Dorsey does. But I expect a lot of really good things from Square, with Dorsey really focusing his sole attention on that. I expect to see a lot of things start rolling out for Square, and them to really have the potential to be a big runner in the forefront of fintech, especially in relation to crypto. But time will tell. We will certainly see. Charles, thanks again for taking time as you do each and every week. Definitely appreciate that, and look forward to doing it again next week. If you do have a question for Adam O'Dell, our Chief Investment Strategist, myself, or Charles, you can ask anytime. You can email us feedback@moneyandmarkets.com. That email address will go right down there, or you can comment below here on YouTube. If you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, what are you waiting for? Why have you not done this yet? You get to see our mugs every week. What's the holdup? Make sure you hit that subscribe button, mash that notification bell right next to it, get notified every time we put out a new video. Could be our marijuana market update, Ask Adam Anything, the Bull and the Bear podcast, or here Investing with Charles. And don't forget to check out the mothership, if you will, the flagship moneyandmarkets.com. That is where you'll see content from Charles, from Adam, from myself, and others who are interested in providing you safe, sound, smart, simple, profitable investment information just for your portfolio. By the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, if you submit a question and to any one of us, and we answer it on one of our, and we use it in any of our videos, we're going to send you some cool money and markets gear, like said t-shirt right here, or hats or sweatshirts or something like that. I have a sweatshirt hanging on my back here. I'd show it, but it's just too complicated for me to pull down and show. But if you do that, send us a question to or a stock you'd like us to look at, or a sector. Again, that's feedback@moneyandmarkets.com, or comment down below here on YouTube. We love to do that. So for Greens and Fortunes co-editor Charles Sizemore, I am Money Markets Research Analyst Matt Clark, wishing everyone safe trading.